Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we're talking about something you probably didn't expect. An archbishop leading protests in Armenia. Yes, you heard that right. An archbishop leading protests. Picture this. A high-ranking religious figure, clad in his ecclesiastical robes, standing on the front lines of political dissent. It's like watching a local priest headlining a metal gig. But what's driving this unlikely crusader? Well, it's a potent mix of political discontent, national pride, and a sprinkle of divine intervention. So without further ado, let's begin with our latest report to find out more.
Bagrat Galstanyan, an outspoken Armenian archbishop known for leading anti-government protests, has declared his intention to challenge Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan for the premiership. Recently addressing tens of thousands of supporters in Yerevan's Republic Square, Galstanyan called for a significant political shift in the wake of a controversial border deal with Azerbaijan.
We do not want the present and future generations of our people to be cursed. The only way to avoid this is for Pashinyan to resign.
The anti-government movement, sparked by the recent border demarcation agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, began in April. The demarcation, formally completed on May 15th, has sparked fears among local populations of potential Azerbaijani aggression following the Armenian militias' withdrawal from 4 villages previously controlled by Armenia since the early 1990s.
People realize that the solutions offered by our authorities today pose a serious threat to the locals' daily lives and existence in general and raise many questions.
Despite mounting opposition, Prime Minister Pashinyan, who retains significant popularity despite recent controversies, defends the cede of villages to Azerbaijan.
Contrary to various assessments, our government isn't dividing, but is trying to reunite, to make the concepts of homeland and state identical, because this is the only way to establish and strengthen the Republic of Armenia.
The Pashinyan administration has pledged to address the infrastructure issues in the affected border villages within months, promising new road constructions and compensations for lost property and land. But the opposition in Armenia is growing with each passing day.
And now we're zooming in on the streets of Yerevan for a more detailed view of the story. Our story centers on Archbishop Bagrat Galstanyan, a man of the cloth who has taken up the mantle of political activism against Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The crux of the matter lies in the aftermath of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war. For those unfamiliar, Nagorno-Karabakh is a region that's been disputed by Armenia and Azerbaijan for decades. A 2020 war ended with a Russian-brokered ceasefire that left many Armenians feeling betrayed by the government's concessions. Enter Archbishop Galstanyan, who saw an opportunity to channel this discontent into a movement against Pashinyan. The Archbishop has become the unexpected figurehead of protests, leveraging his moral authority and popularity. Recently, he has accused Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan of failing to protect Armenian interests and has called for his resignation. But it's not just about post-war discontent. Galstanyan is tapping into deeper veins of frustration within Armenian society. Issues like corruption, economic instability, and a perceived erosion of national values. It's a perfect storm, and Galstanyan is at its eye, urging Armenians to reclaim their country from what he views as incompetent leadership. Now, let's take a closer look at the man himself. Galstanyan is no stranger to the spotlight. He's been a prominent figure in the Armenian Apostolic Church and has a reputation for being outspoken. His leadership in the protests has garnered significant support, not just from the general populace, but also from influential former political figures. And indeed, we are speaking about more than just an activist who's waving a banner. In fact, Galstanyan has come to wield substantial influence. And here is where it gets even more intriguing. Galstanyan holds dual citizenship with Canada. This dual citizenship raises questions about his political ambitions. In accordance with Armenian constitution, he could not legally assume a political role in Armenia. The government's response to the Archbishop's protests has been predictably tense. They have deployed police to manage the demonstrations, and there has been a palpable sense of unease. Pashinyan's administration has been walking a tightrope, trying to maintain order while not further inflaming public sentiment. So, what's next for Archbishop Galstanyan and his movement? Well, it's hard to say. Protests can be fickle. They can either fizzle out or ignite broader changes. For now, Archbishop Galstanyan remains a prominent figure, his voice echoing through the streets of Yerevan and beyond. Whether he'll succeed in his mission to unseat Pashinyan or become a footnote in Armenian history is yet to be seen. And now here to shed more light on the issue is our guest today, Rusif Husseinov, director of the Top Chebyshev Center. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Bagrat Galstanyan, he's a very interesting figure, a spiritual leader turning into a political one. Now, what do you think is his main motivation that got him where he is as a leader of the protests which have engulfed Yerevan recently?
Indeed, we are witnessing an interesting phenomenon in the Armenian politics, because there is a certain portion of the society in Armenia which is dissatisfied the way the Armenian government runs the foreign policy towards Azerbaijan, the peace process with Baku, which includes border demarcation and delimitation. And this aforementioned discontent electorate, they also seem this border demarcation process, which included recent handover of several settlements from Yerevan to Azerbaijan, also as unfair and in some cases illegal. This latest episode regarding the transfer of the villages triggered the present rallies, and the protesters are united around a religious personality, which is, as I already mentioned, an interesting phenomenon, because although the church has traditionally and historically played an important role in the socio-political lives of the Armenians, the rise of a religious personality, which in this fashion, which can challenge the incumbent government, also needs thorough study.
So do you think that this is essentially what it was about? Are there any other reasons for the popularity of this movement beyond the fact that it could be said to be very authentic? I mean, Bagrat Galstanyan initially emerged as a person driven by discontent, right? Because he was from the affected region. So people could say, look, he's authentic, he really cares about this. But this actually went beyond being a regional issue and became a national one. So what would you say is the secret behind his ability to draw such crowds, to keep this attention and to keep this going for so long?
As I said earlier, there is some portion in the Armenian society which still cultivate revanchist sentiments towards Azerbaijan, as they see the way the peace process with Azerbaijan is run quite unfair. Plus, we have to understand that the personality of the Archbishop he's a new face in the Armenian politics. He is not known as a corrupt or discredited politician, as many politicians are known in Armenia. Therefore, he offers a blank background. He offers not only political power, and in some cases this religious dimension, and this is very important. However, we must be careful about the scale of the protests in Armenia. Yes, at the very beginning, they attracted a lot of people. At some point, the intensity faded away a little bit, but it seems Mr. Galstanyan tries to make another comeback and challenge the government seriously this time. And we'll see how the situation will develop.
And he's really serious about this because he asks to be suspended as basically as a member of the church hierarchy because he wants to challenge Prime Minister Pashinyan directly in elections as a candidate. Now, there is one problem with that, and that's the Armenian constitution. So it turns out that you cannot really have dual citizenship and run for the position of Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Bagrat Galstanyan actually has just that. He has a dual citizenship. So what are they going to do about it? What do you think?
You are right. His Canadian citizenship makes him ineligible for the post. However, several times did he claim that he is ready to run the country, quote unquote, if the people desire it, and if it is in God's will, and if the Patriarch of Armenia blesses it. So we'll see. If the protesters are not able to overcome this constitutional challenge for themselves, then we might expect someone else to be nominated by Mr. Galstanyan and his supporters to challenge the present government.
Well, do you think it will work? I mean, right now he seems to be this quite charismatic figure, right? A political outsider. Now, if he nominates somebody else, and if this somebody turns out to be some sort of political activist who did have some sort of past with the previous government of any kind, right? Any sort of establishment past, it would actually take away from this authenticity, from this sort of attractiveness for those who want all the establishment to be gone. They want something new. They want a fresh chapter in Armenian politics. So wouldn't it essentially defeat the purpose? I mean, they would say, look, we were following this charismatic leader. If he's not running, we don't really care.
First of all, we have to understand what kind of political or governance experience Mr. Galstanyan or his supporters do have. Of course, you can always go against the establishment. You can be attracted by the idea of overthrowing the government. But what happens if inexperienced people come to power? It may bring more harm than benefit. But in any case, these rallies, which became spontaneous, which started as spontaneous, if they become a serious and systematic political force, then I think the current government in Armenia should worry a little bit, because they also used the same methods back in 2018, during which, and it was later adopted as the Velvet Revolution, they could overthrow the previous government. Right now, Mr. Pashinyan, the present Prime Minister, he still retains power, although his approval ratings are going down very steadily. He's still in power thanks to the inability of the opposition, which is discredited, weakened, and corrupted, and cannot challenge it. Therefore, the emergence of a new phase, which combines, by the way, not only the political aspects of the Armenian socio-political spectrum, but also religious elements, is really interesting.
So how did the government actually respond, and how did this actually affect the way this movement has been developing? Because initially, Mr. Pashinyan was at least seemingly trying to ignore this new contender, right? He received various calls, to resign, to act in a certain way, and he was just pretending like it never happened. Was this a good choice by Mr. Pashinyan, or could it backfire later on?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say now. In any case, I'm sure that Prime Minister Pashinyan and his allies, they recall their own experience, 2018 Velvet Revolution experience, during which they also used similar protests in order to oust the previous government. However, this time, it is really challenging for Pashinyan. If he takes the present rallies seriously, then it may show his weakness, which is not acceptable in the South Caucasus politics in general. On the other hand, if the protest goes up, and at some point, if it becomes a real political force, then it won't be possible for the Armenian government no longer to ignore it.
What about relations with Azerbaijan? Could this political turmoil actually affect them in any way? Assuming that there is no change in government for the time being, could these relationships, in particular the border demarcation process, still be affected by this?
Yes, of course. In Azerbaijan, the observers and decision makers are closely following the developments in Armenia. The rally, which is nowadays underway in Yerevan, is perceived to have an anti-peace and anti-Azerbaijani nature. Therefore, the growth of the movement strengthened Azerbaijan's concern about the possible return of the revanchist forces to power in Yerevan. And if the revanchist powers indeed come to Yerevan, to power in Yerevan, which is Azerbaijan's worst nightmare, then it can definitely derail the peace process, the border demarcation process, and even cultivate more bellicose rhetoric and pro-revenge actions. And in that case, I don't even rule out any possible escalation between Armenia and Azerbaijan at some point in the future.
So what about other external factors there? The Pashinyan government was quick to remark that if Mr. Galstanyan has received such extensive coverage in the Russian media, which apparently he did, then it surely must be the machinations of Russia. And we know that at this stage, the two former allies, Armenia and Russia, are not on the best of terms. Right? Armenia withdrawing its presence in the CSTO, like gradually, of course, they're not saying that they quit altogether, but it's going down, right? And Armenia eyeing the West, perhaps even hoping for some European future for itself. So obviously there are tensions there, and the government was trying to implicate Mr. Galstanyan in this by suggesting that perhaps this might be a part of a bigger political game. But do you think that such statements are justified?
I personally believe that the movement began as something very authentic. However, whether it later received any foreign elements, whether we can trace some external footprints, such as Russian, we can speculate a little bit about this. And these speculations actually were also fueled by Mr. Galstanyan himself when he met with several politicians who are hailed as pro-Russian in Armenia. At the same time, I want to attract your attention to another foreign country which can also, to some extent, play some role in this movement. It's Iran, because Galstanyan himself, his family originates from Iran. He recently was in Tehran back in February, where he spoke very harsh against the current Armenian government and the peace process with Azerbaijan, and he still retains very close relations with the Iran-based Armenian clergy. So we also have to study this a little bit.
And this is a very interesting point, right? I mean, some people say that this alliance between Armenia and Iran is kind of exotic, but it is actually pragmatic in many ways, right? So it's something to bear in mind. Rusif Husseinov was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now we're moving to the Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed his disappointment over the non-participation of Central Asian countries in the upcoming Global Peace Summit in Switzerland, deeming it a sign of weakness. The president has emphasized the importance of these nations' involvement, even if they hold dissenting opinions.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Central Asian journalists to imagine their countries in Ukraine's situation and consider their stance towards nations that neither support nor participate in crucial peace discussions. He has highlighted the inclusive nature of the summit, inviting leaders who have diverse interests and stances, including those who have imposed sanctions and those who have not. Zelensky is hopeful that the summit scheduled for June in Switzerland will yield a concrete action plan. It is expected to cover 3 critical areas: ensuring free navigation to protect port infrastructure, bolstering global food security, and prompting Ukraine's economic development. Discussions will also address nuclear and energy security to prevent attacks on essential infrastructure, as well as the exchange of captives and the return of illegally deported children. Out of the 160 countries and organizations invited, 50 have confirmed their participation so far.
In a stirring Independence Day speech, Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili underscored the necessity of closer ties with Europe and the United States. Addressing a crowd at Tbilisi's Freedom Square, Zurabishvili voiced her support for anti-government protesters who oppose the contentious foreign agent law.
The Georgian president believes that closer ties with the US and European Union are crucial for maintaining the country's independence and peace. During a speech in the country's capital, she highlighted the desire of a vast majority of Georgians to join the European Union, contrasting the EU's peaceful history with Russian aggression in the occupied territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Her speech comes in light of a potential introduction of new controversial legislation. The law, which would mandate the civil society and media organizations receiving over 20% of their funding from abroad register as foreign agents, has been criticized for mirroring Russian legislation used to suppress independent voices. Critics argued it threatens Georgia's aspirations for EU membership, which were bolstered when the EU granted candidate status to Georgia last December. Massive protests have erupted across Tbilisi and other cities, with demonstrators waving Georgian and EU flags and chanting anti-Russian slogans. Organizers have called for more protests as parliament prepares to vote on overriding Georgian president's veto of the bill.
Gitanas Nausėda has secured a decisive victory, winning a second 5-year term as Lithuania's president with over 74% of the vote in the election runoff. This marks the highest ever support in a Lithuanian presidential election.
In his victory speech in Vilnius, Nausėda expresses gratitude for the overwhelming support. He emphasized his commitment to leveraging his 5 years of experience to further the country's prosperity and highlighted the welfare state, foreign policy and security as key areas of focus for the second term. Nausėda, running as an independent candidate, faced off against Prime Minister Ingrida Šimonytė, representing the Homeland Union Lithuanian Christian Democrats. Despite her defeat, Šimonytė congratulated Nausėda and expressed her intention to return to her duties as a Prime Minister. She acknowledged that her current role did not aid her campaign. The voter turnout for this election was almost 50%, a slight decline from the 53% turnout 5 years ago. Nausėda will officially be sworn in for his term in July, as stipulated by the Lithuanian constitution, which limits individuals to 2 consecutive presidential terms.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.